My name is Faylene Bobier. I'll be chairing the meeting today. I'm a member of the Toronto East branch of the International Socialists. So the topic of the meeting today, resistance across borders, Trump and the fight against the far right. And before I introduce the speakers, I'd just like to read a short land acknowledgement. This land is the territory of the Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of Credit River. We are currently, at least those of us here, are meeting in Toronto, which is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. And we're grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on this territory. So without further ado, we'll have three speakers. First of all will be Rodino, who's the Executive Director of the Coalition of Labor Union Women of the AFL-CIO and a member of Marks 21 in the United States. The second speaker will be Chantal Sundaram, who is an Ottawa anti-racist organizer and a member of the International Socialists. And then our final speaker, Carolyn Egan, who is the president of USW, United Steelworkers Toronto Area Council, and also a member of the International Socialists. So we'll start with Virginia.
Thank you. Thank you all. I'm just thrilled to be here and to be able to extend warm solidarity greetings from March 21 in the States while I'm based here in Toronto right now in this moment. So glad to be here in person. But we're here to talk about what is going on in the States. We're all pretty familiar with the war on workers happening across your southern border. As Alex Kalinikos wrote recently in a Socialist Worker article, Trump is building a much more authoritarian and racist version of capitalist democracy, with political power being concentrated in the White House, the executive branch of the US government, and is recreating an imperialist presidency like that of Richard Nixon. He and Elon Musk are not just fulfilling Project 2025, but often going beyond that program of destruction. One of Trump's objectives is to reinforce US domination of the Western Hemisphere through his designs on Greenland, the Panama Canal, and the tariffs. We can see women, trans, immigrants, workers, and our environments are being assaulted. But we know what is to be done because we've done this before. We can look back. February 15, 2003 was a culmination of the building of a world superpower, the global anti-war movement. In 2006, millions of people marched in cities across the United States to protest immigrant restrictions and to demand foreign policy reform. The protests took place from February to May and included hundreds of thousands of students walking out of their schools. At his first inauguration on January 21st in 2017, millions of women took to the streets in cities across America to demonstrate their opposition to Donald Trump and the values and policies he represents. People of all genders united in opposition to Trump's anti-woman agenda, from immigration and environmental justice to defending the rights of women, workers, LGBTQ people, and people with disabilities. We marched. Days later, in late January and February 2017, thousands of people gathered at various airports in the United States and around the world to protest Trump's Muslim ban. And we beat back attempts to prevent the prohibition of refugees and visitors from 7 countries considered by the administration to be unsafe. In 2020, upwards of 26 million people in the United States had demonstrated in Black Lives Matter protest. So yes, Donald Trump came from the United States, but our country also was the birthplace of the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the Me Too movement, the Occupy movement, and the movement for Black lives. And while not massive, as after his first inauguration, this January, dozens of cities held a People's March, expanded from the Women's March, to protest Trump's policy on immigrant workers and their families, his position on Gaza, the far right, Ukraine, and the climate. And within a day, we could see how the breadth and depth of the cuts to our jobs and services are touching the lives of every American, and every American is taking notice. Pop-up protests are happening in the nation's capital and other cities around the country, and I hope some of my comrades who might have joined from the States can talk more about them. Highways and freeways are being shut down in Los Angeles by immigrant rights activists. Republican lawmakers are being chased out of their own town halls, and J.D. Vance's family vacation was shut down by protesters in Vermont. The teachers, the postal workers, the auto workers, the steel workers, the federal workers are all planning coordinated actions this month and beyond. The American Federation of Teachers held a National Day of Action on March 4th. Educators, students, parents, and community allies protested against assaults on public education and demanded lawmakers strengthen, not undermine public schools and the services they provide. On March 7th, a grassroots campaign called Stand Up for Science mobilized scientists and science advocates in DC, New York City, Chicago, San Francisco, and 28 other cities around the United States. The movement, which was formed last month, also encouraged people to participate in a nationwide walkout at their campuses or workplaces at noon on that day. Scientists and their supporters launched their demands for a restoration of federal scientific funding, the reinstatement of wrongfully terminated employees of federal agencies, an end to governmental interference and censorship in science, and a renewed commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in science. You might have heard this. Trump plans to sign an executive order and illegally fire the entire Postal Board of Governors and place the United States Postal Service under the control of the newly sworn in Secretary of Commerce, who is a billionaire Trump donor. Privatization of the public postal service will lead to higher prices and reduced services and eliminate good living wage union jobs. In response, the American Postal Workers Union is organizing a national day of action and demonstration at post offices across the country on March 20th. Federal civil servants who in normal times simply keep their heads down and do their jobs in their respective corners of the government actually take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to, quote, well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which they are about to enter. So consistent with that duty, they have begun to protest and resist the lawlessness they have encountered during the first month of the second Trump administration, both in and outside of formal legal channels, sometimes even in defiance of gag orders. During this uncertain period, many of them were revulsed by the bizarre, quote, fork in the road directive, offering them a so-called deferred resignation program, under which the Office of Personnel Management, essentially the human resources arm of the executive branch, they gave like a pinky promise that would give them 7 months worth of their taxpayer-funded salary plus benefits in exchange for no work. In response, among other urgent actions they took, a group of civil servants got their heads together and organized a public letter addressed to their confused and distraught colleagues dispersed throughout the government and counseled them to not buy into what one local union leader said has all the markings of a scam. It was very similar, widely reported, that the offer is nearly identical to what Musk offered Twitter employees when he bought the company. More to the point, the letter aims to make clear that accepting the offer would undermine federal workers' oaths and put them in the same law-free zone that the president now inhabits. Hilariously, a right-wing think tank did some of my work for me here by publishing a report decrying documented cases of career bureaucrats resisting presidential policies in the first Trump administration. This is stuff that I just would not have had access to otherwise if it weren't for this report. So Trump's political appointees actually reported to the authors of this right-wing report that career staff, the Department of Education, assigned to work on politically sensitive regulations, including the Title IX due process regulations, would either produce legally unusable drafts that would never withstand judicial review or drafts that significantly diverged from the Department of Education's policy goals. As a result, political appointees had to draft the regulations primarily by themselves. Career employees in the Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division refused to prosecute cases which they ideologically disagreed, even when the facts showed clear legal violations to the Trump legislation. This includes Civil Rights Division career staff refusing to work on cases charging Yale University for racial discrimination against Asian Americans and cases protecting nurses from being forced to participate in abortions. The Department of Health and Human Services career staff circumvented Trump's hiring freeze, which was issued soon after he first took office, by crossing out new hire start dates on their hiring paperwork. Staff actually used Sharpie pens to adjust the start dates retroactively to January 19, 2017, which was the day before Trump took office. Career lawyers at the National Labor Relations Board routinely gave political appointees misleading legal analyses. They would only cite cases that supported their position and omitted contrary precedents. Some career lawyers refused to draft documents reflecting positions with which they disagreed. Career attorneys at the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, did not inform political appointees about major cases the agency was involved in or the government's positions in pending cases. The political appointees had to monitor public court filings instead. The Department of Labor, regulatory staff intentionally delayed producing a departmental priority regulation. It was estimated that a competent private sector attorney could have produced a draft regulation in 2 to 3 weeks, but the team of about a dozen staff claimed they needed a year to do so. So that just came from that one right-wing report about all the ways that federal workers were resisting. The Guardian reported how members of Elon Musk's so-called Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, were barred from entering a small independent federal agency that promoted economic development in Africa after a tense standoff with the staff that they had been sent to fire. Eventually, they made it in with marshals and so on, but they physically resisted the entrance of Musk's troops. Trump was always fearful of a conspiracy against him in the government, but he's actually creating a broad resistance within the federal government. So protests opposing the cuts and supporting laid off workers has started popping up. There's a real hotbed of organizing that has been happening online in signal chats on Facebook and in a popular Fed news channel on Reddit, where federal workers are sharing advice, talking about their experiences and encouraging opposition. NBC reported how the totality of the workers' effort is quite broad. Workers are filing lawsuits, joining protests, and sharing internal documents with media outlets. They've launched anonymous websites and social media accounts to promote their narratives. They built resource guides and recorded private meetings, and they've resigned, sometimes in large numbers, to protest Musk. Federal workers have centered their opposition on influencing public opinion, shaping narratives, and changing the directive of Trump's orders. They're seeking to counter not just Trump and Musk's effort, but decades of public perception that civil servants are unproductive and prone to wasting the taxpayer dime. And they've held several protests outside agencies that the DOGE has targeted. As the layoffs continue, federal workers and supporters have taken their outrage to the streets. Thousands gathered at national parks recently, protesting against the mass terminations at the U.S. Forest Service and the National Park Service. Signs declaring "Protect Our Parks" were held high as demonstrators shouted that understaffing could lead to unsafe conditions for visitors. Other agencies have also seen public backlash. Outside the Department of the Treasury and the U.S. Agency for International Development, fired workers have rallied against what they call politically motivated cuts. The National Treasury Employees Union has planned a large demonstration near the Capitol. The National Association of Letter Carriers held a protest after Trump announced his proposed takeover of the Postal Service. I attended a large protest against cuts to higher ed and science and research in front of the Health and Human Services building, where the presidents of the unions who organized grad worker scientists all spoke. Then we hear about and know the quiet and random acts of dissent that federal workers have been taking. Business Insider actually talked with federal workers who, in response to a host of wide-ranging orders from Trump, Musk, and the White House DOG office, they're now displaying pride flags. They're flaunting their pronouns. They're booing bosses at staff meetings and sending snarky emails. As one said, it's all about malicious compliance. Several workers described protests against the administration's new policies as workers were asked to remove pronouns from their email signatures. Some NASA workers have been introducing themselves with their pronouns during town halls and company meetings. The NASA employee told Business Insider that some have pushed back on the agency taking down gender-neutral signs on restrooms by putting their own signs right back up. One worker at the Social Security Administration said that while they can't include she, her in their email signature, they can still wear a button that says it, and they do. As soon as DEI stuff came down the offices, it went up in our cubicles, they said. I know I went out and bought a trans pride flag for my cubicle as soon as they made us only list male or female. And a longtime federal worker said, this convinced me to join the union at my agency right away and convinced 4 coworkers to join too, adding that the DOGE has been the best thing to ever happen to union membership. So what we see is that the dissent is translating into recognizing the power of unity. Federal workers are joining to have a voice at work and fight efforts to undermine the federal government and democracy itself. A month ago, the American Federation of Government Employees reported that Trump's illegal directives have led to skyrocketing membership at AFG. The number of dues-paying members went up rapidly to stand at 321,000, the highest in the union's history, making it the fastest-growing large union in the country. The president of AFG, Everett Kelly, told the reporter that the union has added more than 8,200 members through the first third of February, after adding nearly 8,000 in the month of January. In normal times, a typical month might see a gain of a few hundred members. The union grew about 5% in a matter of weeks, pushing its rolls to 321,000. And yeah, just to give you a sense, the union had set a goal of reaching a membership size of 325,000 by the end of this year, but they reached it like 2 weeks ago. So although many federal workers have collective bargaining rights, you should know the federal workplaces in the US are open shops, and that means that no one can be required to pay dues, even if they are covered by the union's contract. So like they could be free riders. They're protected by the union, but they don't have to pay dues. So the growth in membership indicates that more federal workers recognize the union's value under Trump and are choosing to fund it voluntarily with a part of their paychecks. It also suggests more government workplaces will form new unions in the months to come. So the AFG president has heard from workers interested in organizing some 750 new bargaining units, and he described 150 of those immediately as being very serious candidates for unionization. These would be offices within federal agencies that are not currently organized, but would petition the government to hold elections. So this is to say that we in the States are resisting in the media, in the courts, and in the streets. National days of action are being called by the teachers' unions, by the postal workers, and immigrant justice groups. A more coordinated day of action and resistance is being organized for May Day of this year. And unions like the United Auto Workers are asserting the need for general strikes and mass coordination and planning in the upcoming years. So comrades, we're not just absorbing these hits in the States, but we're standing up and fighting them and working across borders and making the arguments against capitalism and the analyses of imperialism in our movements. Well, it's just so important. So your solidarity and support is just critical now. And so together in struggle. Thank you.
Thanks, Virginia. So we'll now move on to our next speaker, Chantal, but there'll be lots of time for discussion when the three speakers are finished. So Chantal Sundaram.
Thank you. I was trying to find my pronoun button, but I was able to find my, which I have, but I found my trans flag. I was so inspiring to hear that, and those are the stories we need to hear because we're not hearing them enough. I mean, it's not impossible. If you look on social media, you can find some stories about the resistance in the U.S., but it's not loud enough. It's like a barrage that we're hearing, just this wave of how bad things are in the States without that other side of the picture, and it's so important. I'm sorry not to be with you in person, but I'll just say I'm on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, which is located on both sides of the border of so-called Ontario and so-called Quebec. Indigenous territory, of course, knows nothing of these borders, but it's in the national capital region of so-called Canada that I'm speaking to you from. And at this time of outrage over the actions of Trump's, not just over tariffs, but the vicious attacks on the rights of immigrants, migrants, and refugees, on trans people, the denial of Black History Month, International Women's Day, the whole reality of historic oppression represented by affirmative action and DEI. It is so important for us to hear the stories that Virginia just told about how ordinary people are actually resisting this in the U.S. But we are in a moment when many Canadians who are horrified by what they see and hear from the new administration generally feel that the only way to fight him is to boycott the U.S. And so the media is filled with stories about people canceling their travel to the U.S. in waves. And of course, the cry to respond to the tariff war, which is something which will hurt ordinary working and poor people on both sides of the border, is to buy Canadian. And for many progressive people, it isn't just an economic or nationalist reaction to support Canadian sovereignty, but it comes from a place of genuine horror at the politics of Trumpism and the far right. But the truth is, standing up to Trump in a trade war is not what will actually bring down the politics of hate that he stands for or the far-right movements that support him. Not only will tariffs most hurt, the retaliatory tariffs from Canada will most hurt our siblings across the border who are ordinary working people, but also those who will be most rewarded by the US boycott strategy will be the rich and powerful on this side of the border who are actually not all in it together with the majority of us. So that's what I want to say a few things about during my time. Despite the best of intentions, pro-Canada strategies are actually going to strengthen our own mini-Trumps and their enablers right here at home. So I want to make a partial list of all the Canadian political and economic leaders who actually should be writing thank you letters to Donald Trump right now, written on some kind of Canadian stationery. The first is Justin Trudeau. Justin, okay, yes, he's been forced to resign. But on the way out, he got his moment in the sun to address Donald directly for being stupid with the tariffs. And this is at least partly disguising the real way Justin should be remembered as the prime minister who bought a pipeline with taxpayer money, who betrayed and attacked Indigenous people over and over, who had an actual cancelled Canada Day on his watch and against his will because the Canadian people could not stomach the revelations about Canada's genocide against Indigenous people. Justin should be remembered as the prime minister who legislated unions back to work and who tolerated a far-right convoy occupation of his own state capital for 6 weeks before sending in federal troops, and only then, when ordinary people started fighting back against the far right. So instead of being fired as an unpopular prime minister, Justin gets almost an honorable discharge. The next thank you letter that should be written to Donald should be from Trump Jr. Doug Ford, who literally was handed the Ontario election by the tariff war. Ford's Captain Canada cape was like a supervillain cape that shielded him from attack for his destruction of the single most precious thing about living in Canada, universal public health care. How he got to dress up as Captain Canada while turning over public health care to predatory private profiteers is truly beyond belief. And for Ford, the tariff war is the gift that keeps on giving. Last Monday, he announced at a mining conference that to save the Ontario economy from Trump, he will now speed up mineral extraction in the notorious Ring of Fire in Northern Ontario, something he wanted to do anyway, by cutting short the environmental assessment process and running roughshod over Indigenous treaty rights. Let's remember the words of Grand Chief Alvin Fiddler. These are not Ontario's minerals. They exist within our territories. The unilateral will of the day's government will not dictate the speed of development on our lands, and continuing to disregard our legal rights serves to reinforce the colonial and racist approach that we have always had to fight against. But now, will Ford be able to succeed in tricking Ontarians that unlocking the Ring of Fire is the only way to stand up to Trump? I'll tell you something, Ford's slogan sounds a lot like Trump's. Instead of drill, baby, drill, it's mine, baby, mine. And how about Danielle Smith of the United Conservative Party of Alberta? Her slogan is drill, baby, drill, but she also owes a big thank you to the Donald for supporting her own homegrown and vicious attack on trans people in Alberta. She even has her own war on EDI, which is the Canadian version of DEI. The UCP put out an edict that university and college campuses across Alberta must replace the acronym EDI with a new acronym they made up, ABC, which means accessibility, belonging, and community. It's an attempt to erase historic demands around oppression. The mini Trumps are all over Canada. There's one waiting in the wings in BC, the extreme right candidate John Rusted with his own anti-trans and anti-immigrant agenda, and François Legault in Quebec. Legault should also be writing a thank you letter to Trump on some kind of hybrid stationary Canada and Quebec, thanking Trump for making him look like a hero in the midst of a legal fight over his Islamophobic law against wearing the Muslim hijab in schools, and also a new anti-union law that aims to limit the length of strikes in Quebec. And let's not forget the ones who stand to profit directly from the Buy Canadian strategy. Top of that list for a thank you letter to Trump is Galen Weston, Loblaw's CEO, so recently reviled for his price fixing that he became the target of a popular consumer boycott across the country, which was also fueled by disgust over Galen's treatment of grocery employees during COVID. If he wasn't profiteering enough before, just watch Galen's trade war profiteering, with his stores festooned with Buy Canadian signs. And even this is a hoodwink, because they're using the term prepared in Canada to sell things, because it's not even clear what a boycott means in such an intertwined economy. But now, at least, the boycott is no longer aimed against Loblaws itself. Galen owns a big thanks to Donald for that. In the words of the president of a major Canadian union, QP National, Mark Hancock said, Canada's response cannot simply be Buy Canadian. The CEO of Loblaws is still going to be happy to price gouge you on maple syrup while wearing a maple leaf hat. So this is all to say that we cannot fight the far right and the politicians and bosses who support them in the US if we don't fight them here at home. But what about the Trumpism enablers? In the US, it was the bankruptcy of the Democrats that enabled Trump, and here it is the federal liberals who paved the way for Pierre Poilievre to rise and push the Tories even more to the right to become the party of the Freedom Convoy, bringing openly fascist politics closer to federal power than ever. Now, it's true that Poilievre has taken a hit in the polls now because of the unexpected stance Trump took with Canada. It's the biggest irony that his dream came true to see a government that he sympathizes with get elected in the US, but then one of the first things they do undermines Poilievre's whole political narrative. So there's something to celebrate in this, but it's really short-lived because right now it's pushing us into the arms of a capital B boss of a capital B banking system, Mark Carney. So here's another guy who owes a big thank you letter to Trump. Carney will benefit from this moment to effortlessly push the Liberals even more to the right under the cover of left nationalism, which for most Liberals is really just nationalism. There's nothing left about it. There is nothing progressive about Carney. He has even said he'll cancel the carbon tax, the very thing Poilievre was campaigning on. I always say that Carney is in fact poised to become the sweetener that helps a bitter pill go down. He may succeed in making people swallow disastrous things for the climate that Poilievre might have had a harder time getting away with. So thanks from Carney to Donald for saving the Canadian Liberal Party from near certain defeat and helping them take up more political space to the right. And all of this will be used to justify a military beef up in Canada that only benefits the arms industry. We can see this in the terrifying spike in military spending in Europe right now. It won't be public spending on health and other services that makes us Canadian anymore, but fighter planes to defend our borders. There on social media, there's like a spoof or a redoing of an old ad for Molson Canadian, the Joe I Am Canadian ad. If you haven't seen it, it's something to watch because the original one there were all kinds of weird problems with it, but the new one is even worse. The new Joe I Am Canadian ends literally with fighter jets. So I just wanted to end here because there's so much more to say. I did want to remind us with a short list of Canada's colonial and racist legacy, but there's no short list. It's too much of a long and bloody history to even attempt in the time I have. But I just wanted to say that's kind of the point. Why aren't we talking about that anymore? Why is the media full of stories about Canadians canceling their holidays to the US and not about the implications for missing and murdered immigrant women of the landfill in Winnipeg that was finally searched after much resistance to find the bodies of Morgan Beatrice Harris, Mercedes Murin, and Rebecca Contois? Why are we trading in our orange shirts for red and white shirts? And who benefits from that? I'll end with this. The emergence of a far-right January 6th movement in Canada that was celebrated by local police forces and occupied Canada's national capital for 6 weeks, the so-called Freedom Convoy, has ended in defeat for the time being. But the fact that they got so far in the first place was in large part a failure of the left to respond in real terms to the desperation of the pandemic, and the right was able to build a base in that vacuum. Not only did the left leave a vacuum for the far right to move into, it left a vacuum for center parties to move into, and they are the slippery slope towards the far right and the populist scapegoating that preys on fear, poverty, and despair. We have to punch up, not punch down. We have to look up, not down for blame, whether it's blaming international students for the housing crisis or migrants for labor problems, and also not blame the American people as a whole for electing Trump. The only way we will have the strength to punch up successfully against our own politicians and bosses on this side of the border will be by building concrete solidarity across borders for social justice and refusing to let the rich divide us. We've done this many times before. When Canadian and US leaders colluded on bad trade deals that put workers' rights at risk in Canada, the US, and Mexico. Instead of letting free trade deals divide us, many unions and social movements built united fights against them, including massive protests against globalization and the free movement for the rich, but closed borders for workers and the poor. These are the strategies that we need again. Thanks.
Thank you, Chantal. So our final speaker will be Carolyn, and after that, we'll have time for discussion.
Thank you very much, and I very, very much enjoy the presentation Virginia gave and the very complimentary presentation by Chantal. And I wanted to take a little bit, just before I get into what's happening on the ground here, a little bit of a global perspective. And if we took a snapshot of what we are facing today, we would see economic and political crisis worldwide. This isn't just a US-Canada thing, and I think it's important to say. We're seeing the reshaping of inter-imperialist rivalry. You know, where Russia and China were seen to be one, the US over here, the Ukraine situation, it's all changing, it's all changing. And that reshaping is having huge political implications. And when we talk about the economic and political crisis facing most countries around the world and the people within them, we see a massive polarization taking place. And we are seeing a shift to the right with the growth of political parties, political movements that espouse, as my comrades here were saying, the anti-immigrant racism, the Islamophobia, the anti-Semitism, dividing us, trying to divide us one from another. And one example, and I think it's important to look at, is the recent German election. People are probably familiar with the Alternative for Deutschland won second place. The neo-Nazi party won second place, 20% of the vote. And that was extraordinary. And considering the history of Nazi Germany, and that was not so long ago. Certainly when I was growing up, most of the fathers of my friends had fought one way or the other in the war. You know, people had lost uncles. It was so real. And for the German people, even more so. But this is what crisis can produce. And as Chantal was saying, what's going on and these views, the anti-immigrant sentiment, etc., is not simply the purview of the right. Parties of the center has often been putting this forward with the calls for deportations of migrant students and workers here in Canada. We know what's been going on in the States, the whole wall at the border and all of the ICE operations to try and deport migrants from Mexico and Latin America. And we've had here federal cabinet ministers actually saying that it was the migrant students who are causing the high rate of rents. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. There have been studies shown in areas of this country, smaller cities, different places, where there are no migrants at all. Rents have been going up dramatically and allowing off the hook the developers who are all interested in simply profit, and governments who are refusing to provide affordable housing, letting them totally off the hook. And this narrative is sadly influencing the broader public. In this country, support for immigration had usually and historically been quite high. It's going down. It's going down. Why is it going down? Because people are hearing it not just from the voices of Rebel News and the right, but from the highest level of government in our country. And this has been a problem. And at the same time, you've seen the Liberal government federally legislating workers back to work. The Port of Montreal, ports in British Columbia, the Canadian Union of Postal Workers in their recent strike. And this is betraying the working class of this country. So you can understand fully why people, ordinary working people, no matter where, located across the country, no matter whether they're born here or came here as immigrants, why would they have faith in the governments in this country? Because they see what's going on. And of course, the role of government, as has been said, has fueled the growth of right-wing sentiment as people struggle. The struggle against economic hardship, and I'm sure everyone in this room knows that, a tremendous anxiety about what is going to happen in next. And many of the supporters of right-wing politicians and movements are fearful of what's going to happen, and they want something different than what is. And what else is on offer? That's the issue. What else is on offer? And our comrades in the International Socialist Tendency in Germany in a recent meeting told us that many workers, many of the unemployed in Germany voted for the AfD. They voted because it was the only alternative they saw on offer. And where it had previously had strongholds in the east of Germany, what used to be East Germany, they are now having strong footholds in West Germany. And it's growing, and it's really, really a problem. And the toxic rhetoric that has been coming out of these parties has created a real backlash, you know, as Virginia has said about progressive ideas generally around diversity, equal opportunity, abortion rights, anti-trans bigotry. We're seeing it all, announcing wokeism, you know, denouncing rather wokeism, as we saw in the United States through that election. And we know, as Chantal was saying, Canada is not immune. The convoy was only a short while ago, a few years back. The Islamophobia, the misogyny, the homophobia. I mean, they held the city of Ottawa, where Chantal is from, hostage for approximately 3 weeks, if I remember, and with this type of toxic ideology. And we saw the anti-trans marches when it was a year and a half ago. Now, they were met with significant resistance, certainly in this city and in Windsor, in Mississauga, but they brought people out. There were demonstrations against drag story time in public library that's supported by the parents of these youngsters, and all of this as being enabled by the actions of our government. And we live in a world of very high cost living, the rent skyrocketing, people unable to pay mortgages. I know certainly people in my unions, United Steelworkers, who had to sell their homes because they got in at a low rate, variable went up, and boom, they're out. They had to sell their homes. It's really, really, really hard. And they are hearing only one solution. And this solution is coming from the right, as I mentioned. There's also been a deep pessimism in many trade union leaders. You heard it. I certainly remember a forum after the last provincial election, which wasn't that long ago. People are so demoralized, they won't come out, workers won't come out, you know, this is the issue, you know, we tell them, vote the NDP, and yet, did they? No, hundreds of thousands didn't vote at all. And that's, and we saw in this election, the small percentage, well, I forget what it was, 45%, something of that, very small. And this is not because people won't fight, particularly if given a lead. I mean, you know, I saw a presentation recently that showed in this province, the industrial heartland of Ontario, of Canada is Ontario, but also so many public sector workers. 50% of all organized workers in this province went on strike in the last 5 years. People are prepared to fight. If there's a reason to fight, they know what they're fighting for, and they're given a lead. And this is so important. The Union of Postal Workers just recently, the LCBO, the Liquor Control Board, a while back, National Steel Car in my union, and people were rejecting contracts negotiated by their leadership. They were rejecting them because they wanted more. The metro workers, that happened there as well. And these are people who can barely afford to live on the wages they make, go on strike, and you don't make the wages you normally would do on strike, yet they were prepared to do it. And it tells you that people certainly are prepared to fight if they see a reason to do so. And many of our comrades, of course, out on many of those lines, building the solidarity. And we can't allow the right to take up the political space that's there. We have to take on, where there is demoralization, on fighting the attacks. And I think everyone that I knew, US or Canada, woke up after the Trump victory, really bummed out, as we used to say. Really, this is like, oh my God. People stopped watching CNN. They stopped watching TV. They just trying to get into some kind of safe space around themselves with their family, their friends, reading books, having another drink than they normally would, or whatever. But you know, everyone had their own answer because they were, and we're only human. We see what's happening, and it affects us. But the thing is, we have to look at how we can stop what's going on and not allow it to happen. And this is what we have to say to our fellow workers, those are on campus, if we're on campus, or our community groups, etc. And when you look at other countries in the world, and I said globally this is affecting everyone, when there was the terrible killing of some young children in northern England and the right seized upon it. Oh, these people have to be deported. These is all because they're refugees, et cetera, et cetera. Tommy Robinson, a neo-Nazi in the UK, all kinds of demonstrations were taking place. But what happened was an organization that's been working for quite a few years, Stand Up to Racism, and they had local chapters all over the country. They called demonstrations, and their members went out, many of them union members, just ordinary community people, and they countered them in a very significant way. And because they were countering them, they were able to bring many, many, many more who weren't in the organization, but yet could see, I refuse to allow these people to attack refugees simply because they've come here for a better life. And it shows you what can happen. And these groupings, when they came together with Stand, they denounced the bigotry, and they gave confidence to all kinds of people beyond themselves. And obviously here, we know, as I mentioned earlier, the deportation, how many deportations are we looking at of the migrant students, now workers who have come here? They were promised jobs. They were enticed by this government to come. You come, you can stay, you can live your life here. They helped keep the economy afloat during COVID. And now, because of the move to the right, they're facing deportation. And this is what we have to do. We have to build movements to support them staying here. And again, many of our comrades have been out at the when the encampment was there at International Women's Day yesterday. If people were at it, 8,000 people marching the street. One of those young women spoke very, very, very well. And that's why we have a capacity to build movements to challenge these racist ideas. And mass actions like that are critical, and they're the key. And I believe, I am a trade unionist, I think the trade union movement, organized working class, is equally key to doing that and doing it well. Now, the whole question of tariffs, as Chantal was saying, I mean, Trump has come on building Fortress America, bringing back Manifest Destiny or all that, Panama, Greenland, Canada, all of this. I mean, he is a right-wing president, has a far-right base. He's trying to do take a step beyond what the other the presidents before him took. But at the same time, look at Biden, look at his approach to migration, look at his, I mean, I won't go into it, but we can see, what was there and why did people in the United States, good, decent people of all backgrounds, choose Trump? Because they wanted something different. They were being promised something different. What they're getting is horrific, of course. And what you talked about was so inspiring. And that if people, that demonstration in northern Vermont, I mean, I'm from New England originally, so it really made my heart beat happily there, because Vermont is a state of about 600,000 people. Very small. The north, it has ski hills and things of that nature. The biggest city is 46,000, Burlington up there. So federal workers, people who are being affected by the Medicaid cuts, et cetera, heard Vance was coming with his family to go to a 5-star resort and go skiing. All right, so they started organizing. They started organizing a week beforehand. And then there was that incredible meeting with around Ukraine on Friday, and that the manner in which people, that Vance and he spoke, I mean, it just offended people, what their position on Ukraine, but neither here nor there. It so offended them. So by the time Vance was driving in the big black long cars, there were 1,000 people in a little small town in northern Vermont. The magazine, oh, these are all people from Massachusetts, and they're from New York. They're not. And when the interviews took place, because I looked at a lot of the local press, they were all from these small towns. They were federal work. One said, in my and probably worked in a park department situation, because there's a lot of those in Vermont, not a lot of trees, not a lot of people. And he said 11 have already been gone. And others, you want to go ski in Russia. Or the younger people were saying, fuck off, Nancy, a Nazi scum. I mean, it was all, but it was everyone. People with ski poles and their skis at their ends. It was extraordinary. And these were not organized people. They just came up. And Vermont is a fairly libertarian state, shall I say, conservative, Bernie Sanders, of course. But beyond that, it usually is sort of a Republican. And this is ordinary people, as you say, that are coming out and saying that this is unacceptable, and hopefully, as we see, it will grow and it will grow and it will grow, and that's why we have to build unity across the borders. And I think, as Chantal said, the question of Canadian nationalism, much fine, people understand it. They don't want to be taken over by the United States, But we are all in this together with leaders like Ford, Captain Canada, leading us. Ford, who is privatizing our healthcare system, destroying our schools. I mean, I can't go on and on and on. These are not the people we want to lead any movement, because they are not going to lead a movement for change. They're going to do exactly as Chantal said, and they should thank very much Trump for what he is doing. And I think when we're looking at this, when I said that mass actions, broad groupings are really important, and the trade union movement is key to that. And I have a lot of critique of the leadership of unions in many, many instances. But I'm also looking at what some are saying, and people beyond ourselves are saying these things. If people happen to be from Hamilton, read the Hamilton Spectator. The Hamilton District Labor Council president, who had an op-ed there, was very good. And he clearly stated in response to the Trump's tariffs, a worker in Hamilton has much more in common with a steel worker in Pittsburgh than any CEO in this country. And that was really important, because it's true, because honest to heaven, steel workers, National Steel Car, that was out on strike a year and a half, 2 years ago, whatever, they had 3 deaths in about a year and a half because of the health and safety violations. I mean, people know who the boss is and who you are. And, it's the robber and the robbed, it's pretty clear. And that is not what we need to be. And, the Amalgamated Transit Workers Union in the States, and it's an international union here, again, their leadership put forward a very progressive point of view. And I'm a steelworker, so I'll have to say that this just came out emphasizing the deep ties that unite Canadian American workers. Canadian American workers are not in competition. We build goods together. These tariffs will hurt manufacturing, drive up costs, and kill jobs on both sides of the border. Our whole union stands in full solidarity with our Canadian members, as all across the U.S. we fight for a real solution to unfair trade. Now, these statements are important. Do I always agree with the leadership of my union? No, I don't. But in this instance, when they're saying unity amongst workers, we accept this and we say yes, and we build on it. It's important. It's important that these things are coming up. And what do we call? We call for EI reforms, right? Shorten the length of time, the hours you have to work, broaden the amount of money you're getting, 75%, 100%, whatever we can win there, or rent controls, price controls, all of these, affordable housing, all of these things are what we have to put forward and fight for as a real solution to the problems of workers. And that's so important. So we cannot wait to build unity against the growth of the right. People change their minds and struggle. We know that. So we can't wait. And a worker fighting their boss can certainly be pulled to fighting rather than accepting the racist ideas of the right. And we cannot allow what I would say is now a snowball to grow into an avalanche of right-wing ideas. We have to offer hope. We have to offer an alternative with an anti-racist class argument. And we have to really sound the alarms as these debates go on about the dangers of the right and build strong, united fronts. And this is absolutely crucial and can bring people out of the feeling of hopelessness. And any of you who were at the International Women's Day March yesterday, 8,000 in the streets, a terrific, Virginia spoke, others spoke, a terrific program with migrant workers, with people, talking about the struggle in Sudan, workers' struggles, indigenous fight backs, and denouncing the policies of Donald Trump, and with a good class anti-racist perspective. This is so important, and it brought real confidence to those who were out. I heard so many things from people, and there were hundreds of Spanish-speaking people, women just full of energy. The Kurdish community was out, Sudanese activists, and thousands, literally thousands of trade unions. They were really the heart of it. And we're going to encounter nationalist arguments. Of course we are, any debate about how one goes forward, but these arguments don't always win. And in my recent experience, we're not going to win them all, that's for sure. People can understand as you go through the arguments why it doesn't make sense for them to unite behind the Fords of the world and others who are saying they're going to protect us from Donald Trump. So I'm just going to end by saying we can organize, we can win. Hope comes through struggle. And one of our greatest strengths, I think, in the International Socialists is our political clarity. We're a part of a worldwide tendency with people in Korea and Africa and Europe, all over. And the importance of a united front, not aligning with our bosses, but people who may be to the right of us in the NDP or wherever they may come from politically, but are willing to fight the rise of the right along with us. And as we do this, hopefully, more people will join the IS, develop more comrades who are rooted in Marxism. And I think today we desperately need to give people hope. to allow them to be inspired that their collective strength can make a difference and turn back the tide against Trump and all the right-wing bigots that are following his policies. So thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much for those excellent presentations.